I can only apologise for the shakiness of some of the camera work that you are about to bear witness to. These are 3 watches that I took on a recent trip to Malaysia, alongside one that I decided to buy while out there. The idea behind the video is not so much to review the watches, but just gives a little bit of insight as to why I decided to buy them in the first place. The 4 watches are the Seiko SRPK 17K1, the Islander Northport, the Bulova Devil Diver, and the Boldr Field Medic. I actually originally bought this watch with the idea that I was going to wear it during the London Marathon last year, simply because it's made of titanium, it was light, I didn't want to run around carrying the extra weight of my phone, but on the day I actually decided, you know what, even though it's light, I don't want to carry this around with me either. You can see the watch has sustained a little bit of damage here, and let me quickly show you how that happened. Fairly sure that's not how that's supposed to be done, but at least it shows that I'm a believer in the idea that you should wear a watch and not simply own one to look at or have it as an investment. The watch has a Seiko Mecha Quartz movement in it, and that combined with lightweight titanium was really the reason that I went for this watch. But as we're doing a video here on summer watches, you can see that I've made my own little modification to this with the strap. The NATO strap supplied is absolutely fine, but it just isn't yellow. The weight is a significant factor. It's so light that you can wear it without really realizing that you've got a watch on. It's also the least expensive of all the watches that I'm showing in this video, so I actually found myself wearing this watch more than any other on the trip. I would say that the yellowness probably counts against it for everyday wear though. It's not something that I would wear to the office on a regular basis. I do think when it comes to looking for a summer watch that actually colour is the most important thing that you need to be considering, and with a watch like this, clearly a summer beach watch is not exactly the idea that the designer was originally going for, but with a change of a strap I think it works. So that's the Field Medic, a tough little watch, but one that, because it's made of titanium, will show those scars when it gets them. In the recent Barbie movie there's a bit where Ken says, "My job is just beach," and if there was a watch that was just beach, I think this could be it. I actually bought this last year, specifically hunting around on YouTube trying to find a watch that screamed summer. Up until Christmas last year I was working in an office with a very fine gentleman who actually turned me on to watches in the first place, and not a day would go by in that office without us having some sort of argument or debate about watches. A little bit during that time, and maybe more so afterwards if I'm being really honest, spent a long time trolling through watch YouTube, and that sort of inspired me to start making this channel of my own really. I need a bit of an outlet to talk about these watches. It was really through that process of just trawling through endless YouTube videos that I ended up stumbling across this watch, on the wrist of its creator in fact, on Urban Gentry video, and immediately I just thought that is exactly what I'm looking for, something that just screams beach. It actually proved to be quite a difficult watch to track down, simply because it's an American micro brand. I live in the UK. By the time that I actually found the watch, it was already completely sold out, and third-party sellers on eBay obviously having to pay import tax. It ended up being quite an expensive job to try and find one, but eventually I tracked one down for under asking price in the UK, and bought it immediately. I would say that the size of the watch is just about on the upper limit of what I would look to buy usually, but if you're shopping for colour, actually there really isn't a huge amount available in terms of dive watches in particular. It's really the Zodiac Super Seawolf that's at the top end when it comes to colour, but those are significantly more expensive than this. And that about wraps it up for the Islander Northport. That brings us on to the Bulova Devil Diver, or the Oceanographer. And one thing to know about this watch is that, unlike every other of the Oceanographer re-release range, this watch is a little bit smaller than all the other colorways that are available. The Devil Diver is similar in price to the other Oceanographer models. One big difference though is that it comes with this custom rubber strap which fits very well, and I would say is actually one of the highlights of this version. 41mm is right on the upper limit for me in terms of how big a watch I'd actually be willing to wear. But with this one, it's actually the thickness I think that counts against it, because that 41mm actually wears quite nicely with that cushion case. I'm not a big fan of the thickness of it, but to be honest with you, if you're going to wear a watch for the beach that's this bright, I don't really think that you can complain too much about it having so much wrist presence. And when I say bright, I do mean bright. This thing is absolutely ridiculous, and the way that I've had to film this video really does not do this thing justice. It is so unspeakably orange. I'd also level a criticism against this watch in terms of that handset. It's definitely not going to be to everybody's tastes. It's very good in terms of lume, but it's extremely stubby because of those raised lume pips inside the dial. One of the reasons that I really wanted this watch though, if you've spent as much time browsing through jewelers looking for watches sub 500, sub £1,000, it's actually quite difficult to find something that I would be willing to wear that stands out quite as much as this does. It's certainly not something for the office, but if you want to show that you're in a good mood, then this is pretty colourful. I know linking the mood that you're in to the watch that you're wearing might sound quite a silly thing, but I've not always had the strongest mental health in the world, and actually one of the first things I do every day is pick out a watch. So if I go for something colourful, it tends to be a good day. So if I'm being perfectly honest, this watch doesn't really fit very well into the confines of this video. Essentially, while I was out on my trip, I made another purchase, and it was this watch, and I'd already planned that I was going to start filming some of the others while we were away and have some nicer backgrounds, although I think you can tell that maybe the equipment that I brought with me was pretty subpar, I think is being generous. So this doesn't really fit as a summer watch per se, but I thought I'd include it anyway as I had all the footage ready to go. So although you could argue about how rare a limited edition this one may be, given that I think there's something like 15,000 of them, this is a re-release, a recreation should I say, of the very first Seiko 5 sports watch. And effectively what happened on the trip is that we changed up a certain amount of money, not realised quite how cheap it is to live in Malaysia, and then found that we had a whole load left. My wife was generous enough to say, no, you spend it on yourself, it's all good. And I think she immediately regretted that decision, given that it turns out that Malaysia has an unbelievably high ratio of budget watch shops in its shopping malls. The one thing that this watch does that really stood out for me is that nothing else that I own looks anything like it. And actually I hadn't been to Malaysia for 14 years, so that retro idea of going back there, I don't know, it really worked for me. It very much looks like the bracelet on this one is going to be one of those elasticated jobs from the past that's going to rip out all your arm hairs, but actually the construction on this compared to a lot of Seiko bracelets that I've had in the past is pretty solid actually. Almost every element of this watch is exactly the same as the original release, and only really one of those things I see as a downside. That bezel action is not great. But that leads me on to the topic of watch taste, and indeed the idea of making mistakes with your purchases. And I've never sold a watch. I keep them all. It doesn't really matter to me if later on down the line I realise, oh no, actually, maybe I'm not going to wear this one as much. Maybe it's just going to sit in a box. But the point is, I look at that box every day, and slowly but surely my tastes become more and more refined. Or not that you might think that from this video, I'm sure. But I'd very much say that's true of the video as well. I wanted to make a start on something. I wanted to start a new little project for myself, a little outlet for me to talk about these watches, and I already know that this video is not exactly a masterpiece, but I feel like I've learned an awful lot just by putting it together. I guess that's one of the dangers of filming a video like this. It's a snapshot in time. It's not as if I'm gonna pay for another airfare ticket to go back to this beach with better equipment, so it was either a case of release the video or deal with some shaky camera work, and I decided, you know what, making a start of some kind is better than making no start at all. And that's it for my summer watches. I'm not really expecting that anyone will comment on this video in particular, but it would be nice to have a conversation about just how terrible people might think my taste is. Certainly I have a lot more watches, so I've really enjoyed this process, and maybe I'll make another video.